Before we will proceed to the main topic, let us first discuss its general introduction. The main purpose of this is to present the principal ideas and issues in the area of ethics offered by philosophers from classical to contemporary times. In metaphysics, certain fundamental themes relevant to all aspects of the philosophic enterprise. These themes centered on the basic questions of what it is to be or to exist. Involved in being were such realities as causality, change, and contingency, and the foundation of being was seen to be the existence of God. The philosophy of man treated such central issues for man as a question of his unity in being, his spiritual nature, his identity, and the character of his knowledge. These two philosophical sciences are called speculative branches of philosophy because their main thrust is toward finding true and satisfactory answers to the questions they raise. What is it to be in metaphysics, and what is it to be a man in philosophy of man? Although the conclusions of speculative sciences will have an indirect effect on the conduct of man, they do not immediately set themselves to determine what being should be or what man should be. In ethics, however, presupposes some principles from metaphysics and some notion of man's nature from the philosophy of man, but it is mainly concerned with what man should do, with what his actions or conduct as a man should be. More fully expressed, ethics is a practical study that seeks to find some principle of order for those human actions for which we are freely responsible and over which we have rational control. For example, to the countless other acts of men, such as digestion, respiration, the activity of the nervous system, that are our own actions, but that are controlled automatically and without need for any choice or direction on our part. The moral philosopher is concerned with human acts, with those actions in which we are free and responsible. But he is not alone in this concern. The psychiatrist, the theologian, and the psychologist, each in his own way, has an interest in deliberative and free human actions. The moral philosopher differs from each of them in the point of view that is uniquely his. Unlike the psychiatrist, the moral philosophers are not concerned with the analysis of the subconscious motivation of any one individual. The moralist differs from the theologian in that the theologian uses the content of revelation as the source for his normative morality. John Locke, the famous English philosopher, once observed that men thought creatively long before Aristotle wrote his logical treatises on how to think. The same observation can be made about ethics. There were morals long before there was any science of morality. The advantage of a continuing experience of moral decisions is not enough. Moral decisions require analysis on the philosophical level. Every man wants to feel some rational consistency in the kinds of deliberate action he experiences. He is not content to choose to act without reflection. He wants to see whether such choices are warranted or perhaps are the best moral choices he could make. Even with the differences that do exist from the philosophers, certain similarities appear in the key position. Let us then address ourselves to the key issues.
So, good day everyone. So, I am tasked to discuss about the overview of the key ethical issues of the dialectical tradition. So, first overview of the key issues is the value. So, theory of value. So, value is sometimes defined as the object of human desire and striving. It is also used in three different ways in philosophy. In its broad sense, value theory is a catch-all label used to, and it is concerned with theoretical questions about the value and goodness of all varieties. Questions and often cross the boundaries between normative ethics and the meta-ethical. In its narrow sense, value theory is used for a relatively narrow area of normative ethical theory particularly but not exclusively. Of concern of consequentialities. In this narrow sense, value theory is roughly synonymous with axiology. So the technical name of theory value is axiology. So axiology can be thought as a primarily concerned with classifying what things are good and how good they are. For instance, a traditional question of axiology concerns whether the objects of value are subjective physiologically states or objective states of the world. And it encompasses all branches of moral philosophy, social, political philosophy, aesthetics, and sometimes feminist philosophy and philosophy of religion, whatever areas of philosophy are deemed to encompass some evaluate aspect. And the next overview is the obligation. So obligation is claim made upon us by reasons that some things are to be done and deserve praise, whereas they are to be avoided and deserve blame. So obligation is require action being done, and duty is the carrying out of this action. Sociologists believe that an obligation is an objective force. Philosophers, however, also believe that obligation are moral imperatives. So the technical name of the part of ethics that deals with obligation is called deontology. So Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher of enlightenment, stated that the experience fact of duty of, or responsibility implies that we are free in his words. From his words, I owe, therefore I can. So Kant justified this by arguing that moral obligation is rational necessity, that which is rationally willed is morally right, because all rational agents rationally will themselves to be end of never merely as means. So it is morally obligatory that they are treated as such. All human must be seen as inherently worthy of respect and dignity. And Kant also argued that all morality must stem from such duties, and that duty is based on deontological ethic, which is consequences such as pain and pleasure are irrelevant. That's all. Thank you.
Natural law and virtue. Natural law is a theory in ethics and philosophy that says that human beings possess intrinsic values that govern their reasoning and behavior. Natural law maintains that these rules of right and wrong are inherited in people and are not created by society and judges. There are two case features of the natural law. Features the acknowledgement of which structures his discussion of the natural law at question 94 at the prima seconde of the Summa Theologiae. The first is that when we focuses on God, or we focus on God's rules as the giver of a natural law, the natural law is just one aspect of divine providence. And so the theory of natural law is, from that perspective, just one part among others of the theory of divine providence. The second is that when it focuses on human roles represented of the natural law constitutes the principle of practical rationality, those principles by which human action is to be judged as reasonable or unreasonable. Virtue is a philosophy developed by Aristotle and ancient Greek. It is the quest to understand and live life of moral character. This character approach to morality assumes that we acquired virtue through practice. So by practicing being honest, brave, just, generous, and so on, a person develops an honorable and moral character. According to Aristotle, by honing virtuous habits, people will likely make that right choice when faced with ethical challenges. Virtue is a powerful moral action that enables man act with ease and order in some area of his life. This excellence or good qualities has been given in species from classical times to today. Thank you.
In this topic, we move from the reasonable world of the Greeks and the God-centered world of the medieval Christians to the subjective moral philosophy developed by Immanuel Kant, George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, and Karl Marx. So subjective means dependent on the mind or an individual's perception for its existence. So subjective morality says that our morals are all human-made and can vary from person to person. So that means that our morals are different from one another. Before we proceed, let us know first what is dialectical tradition, which is our main topic. Dialectical tradition is a discourse between two or more people holding different points of view about a subject, but wishing to establish the truth through reason argumentation. As per Kant's dialectics, he not only achieved a radically different solution to the problems, but also ushered in an era of critical philosophy a new approach to the field of morality. An emphasis on subjective analysis, creativity, and human initiative distinguished the critical philosophers from their medieval and ancient predecessors. The Greek and Christian philosophers considered man's main task is to be discovering the structure and law that was already present in the world. The human mind was seen essentially as an instrument for copying the world in knowledge. This objective tendency was changed to a subjective one by the critical philosophers. Thus, Kant spoke of the moral law as being within man, meaning that moral law is not given to us from the outside, and moral law is nothing other than rational will. The philosophies of Kant, Hegel, and Marx reflect the brilliant accomplishments of man in the world of science and technology. At the same time that man was using superb techniques in remarking his world, he was beginning to emphasize his own role in the formation of his knowledge and values. In Hegel, man's confidence in his own ability to construct a completely adequate, systematic understanding of the world is at its highest. In the quest for the system that would rationally explain the absolute on the world, the nature of history, and the role of the spirit, Hegel elaborated an intellectual structure that brought him not only serious followers but also dedicated opponents. Marx too emphasized the relationship between the man and the world and the necessity for man to work and relate himself to the world.
Perspective on key issues, let's talk about first the value. To all three of these philosophers, the dignity and autonomy of the individual person was of paramount importance. In his famous ethical treatise, Critique of Practical Reason, Kant viewed the will of the human person as completely autonomous and the value of the person as supreme. We are instructed to treat humanity always as an end in itself, and we are warned against using other persons merely as means to an end. Sometimes um, it is morally wrong to treat persons as means. When a person says that someone is treating him merely as a means, for example, he often implies that she is failing to abide by a moral norm, ethically disapproving judgment that the person is just using or sometimes simply using another are common in everyday discourse. However, treating others as means or equivalently using them is frequently morally permissible. For example, waiters use customers to get tips. Customers treat waiters as means to cuisine. Professors use students to test their ideas. Students use professors to gain expertise, and so forth. Under what conditions is using another wrong? Philosophers since Kant have tried to answer this question, at least in part, by offering accounts of when a person uses another and does or does not just using the other or equivalently treat him merely as a means. Hegel was very much influenced by Kant's moral theory. In the formation of his own philosophical theory, he unified his entire philosophy into a comprehensive rational system of the universe. He saw all reality as the manifestation of an absolute spirit that is dynamic in history. Like Kant, he valued the individual and freedom but not the same extent. And for Hegel, the state is a value to which the individual is subordinated. The spiritual is a value in its various manifestations in art, literature, and philosophy. To Hegel, freedom is not so much an individual's right, but rather a result of human reason. Freedom was not the capacity to do as one liked, but was the alignment with the universal will towards well-being. It is the state culmination of moral action, where freedom of choice had led to the unity of the rational will in all parts of society, were nourished within the health of the whole. So second is the obligation. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant analyzed the kind of reason that operates in the sciences and showed that all scientific knowledge is subjective in character even though it retains universality and necessity. In his two major works in ethics, Critique of Practical Reason and Foundation of the Metaphysics of Morals, Kant was concerned not with pure reason, but with practical reason that's applicable to human conduct and practice. Kant's most important statement on obligation is found in his categorical imperative, an act in conformity with that maxim, and that maxim only, which you can at the same time will to be a universal law. The word categorical does not indicate a classification, rather it means unconditional. Accordingly, Kant rigorously insisted that the maxim on which one chooses to act admits of no exception before it can be acted on. If, for instance, lying is forbidden, is taken as maxim, no exceptions are allowed under any circumstances. The physician is obligated to tell the sad truth of impending death to the seriously diseased cancer patient. By imperative, Kant means a moral command. Kant's analysis of the common moral concepts of duty and goodwill led him to believe that we are free and autonomous as long as morality itself is not an illusion. Yet in the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant also tried to show that every event has cause. Kant recognized that there seems to be a deep tension between these two claims. If causal determinism is true, then it seems we cannot have the kind of freedom that morality presupposes, which is a kind of causality that can be acted independently of alien causes determining it. His main point, guys, was that morality and obligation are not founded on any individual will or person. Third is the Kant's theory of natural law. To understand Kant's theory of natural law, it is necessary to realize that the ethics of Kant is intuitionistic. This means that the standard of morality will be found only when man recognizes that the moral is within. He cannot look outside himself to find his duty. His call to duty and lawfulness is an inner demand which makes itself clearly heard. Intuitionism implies something more than the immediacy with which man recognizes the law within him. Since moral lawfulness concerns the inner man, morality is not properly a quality of outward behavior. However, the intuitionist advises following the inner dictates of duty without regard for the consequences. Since Kant placed the natural law and standard of morality within the individual moral agent, he implied that there are no sins but only sinners, no sanctified but only saints. We must note that Christian golden rule is an essential part of Kantian ethics. Basic to an understanding this categorical imperative is the realization that Kant translated "do unto others as you would have others do unto you" into what is right for one is right for all. Those moral laws are valid for all men. Hegel, on the other hand, viewed natural law in a different way. According to him, that he did not share Kant's confidence that the individual could simply follow his own inner directives to the duty that he must perform without regard to consequences. He saw the individual moral agent as needing the organization of the state even to be an autonomous and free individual. The law of man's nature and the standards of his morality come to him imperfectly in his capacity as an individual or as a member of a family. So according to Hegel, that laws and moral standards are more perfectly embodied in the wisdom of man organized into a state community. One reason for the greater wisdom of the state is that it provides a necessary principle of order and pattern for the freedom of individual citizens. And last is the virtue. For Kant, the primary human virtue and excellence is dignity, the intrinsic worth of the person which results from his status as a rational being. Everything else but man may have a price and be a commodity of exchange. Persons are priceless because they are unique and irreplaceable. Further, man is autonomous. He must make his own laws according to the principle. This autonomy is the basis of his dignity. This explains that he valued freedom of the individual, but not to the extent that freedom be exercised in disorder, which would occur if in the exercise of my own freedom, I will destroy the freedom of others. No, a related good quality would be sensitivity to the greater wisdom of the human community against that of any one individual. For Marx Kant, the excellence which marks the authentic human being is spontaneous and creative union with one's fellow man and with nature. Opposing this is alienation or separation of man from his own authenticity, from his fellow man, or from nature. Marx Kant also stressed the traditional virtue of courage and demanded that men should oppose and finally overthrow the system that dehumanizes and constantly exploits them.